Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for our cattle markets webinar with Dr. Derrell Peel. Welcome. My name is Dawn LeBeau. I'm the Senior Program Officer with Occupton. We are a native CDFI located in Eagle Butte, South Dakota, and we serve agriculture producers across Indian country. And so we have these webinars once a month, offering knowledge and expertise from those in the agriculture industry. And so happy to be here with you all. I'll go ahead and introduce Derrell. So Dr. Derrell Peel is the Charles Breedlove Professor of Agriculture Business in the Department of Agriculture Economics. He has served as the Extension Livestock Marketing Specialist since he came to Oklahoma State University in 1989. He has a BS and an MS degree, both from Montana State University, and a PhD from the University of Illinois. He previously served as the superintendent of the Southeastern Colorado Range Research Station in Springfield, Colorado. His main program area at Oklahoma State University includes livestock market outlooks and marketing/risk management education for livestock producers. He is also working in the area of international livestock and meat trade with a particular focus on Mexico and Canada and the North American livestock and meat industry. He lived in Mexico on sabbatical in 2001, and he has developed extensive knowledge of the Mexican cattle and beef industry and the economics of cattle and beef trade between US and Mexico. So we're happy to have Derrell back here for a second presentation. He joined us last year for a two-part presentation of the cattle markets and went over some detailed pieces for a lot of our producers, and that was met with a lot of excitement. So we're happy to have him back with us today. And before I pass it to Derrell, I'll just go through just a few housekeeping things. Y'all are welcome to use the chat box or the Q&A box while he is presenting. So if you have a question in real time, use those features and I will make sure that Derrell sees the question. So yeah, thank you for joining us, everybody. Derrell, I'll go ahead and pass it to you and you can share your slides. And I'll just go ahead and go off camera here, but I will be in the background helping as needed. Thank you.
You bet. Well, thank you, Dawn, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have a chance to visit with you again. So I will share my slides here, and we'll talk about this cattle market. Obviously, we're in a very unique situation. Cattle markets are always dynamic. I've never seen them when they weren't. It's such a complex industry. There's a lot of moving parts. But having said that, I think we're in arguably the most unique situation that I've seen in my career in terms of where we find ourselves. We'll talk a little bit about how we got here and importantly, how it's different than some things we've seen before that look a little like it. But then I'll work through kind of the usual pieces of market fundamentals, and then at the end we'll come back and we'll talk about from an inventory and a cattle cycle perspective, sort of where we go from here. And so, just a quick rundown. These are Southern Plains prices, so they're actually not going to be vastly different than what you see in South Dakota. Pretty similar price levels, maybe slightly different. But the important thing is that we have set new records across the board. These are KEF prices. So we've been higher year over year. We've been going up strongly since really late 2022. We'll see that in a minute in a little more historical context. The bigger feeder cattle, likewise, mostly higher last year over year, and higher again yet this spring. Again, we've set new record levels for all classes of cattle so far this year. Fed cattle prices, I should have put the 5 market price in here. It'd be slightly higher than this, but same exact pattern. And we've got fed cattle markets at record price levels. And of course, all of this is driven by the supply situation, the inventory situation that we'll talk about here momentarily. If you put all of these prices together and a little more history behind them. So the blue line here is the calf price, the green line is the feeder cattle price, and the red line is fed cattle. And so you see, a couple of basic features about cattle markets. Of course, on the right-hand side here is where we are now. We are at record levels. We have, by quite a bit, surpassed the previous highs, which happened about a decade ago, in a somewhat similar market environment. And that's part of what I want to talk about. Certainly, if you look at that, what happened 10 years ago, a lot of producers today say, yeah, I remember that. We had high prices for about 2 years, and then it was kind of over pretty quickly and pretty hard on the backside. There are some similarities to the current situation to that time period. It was drought in both cases that set up those high prices, but the drought situation this time has been quite a bit different than the drought situation a decade ago. And as a result, the cattle market situation is quite different. And I'll sort of talk about that as we go forward here. The other point I want to make while I'm here is you'll notice that these prices, they do tend to move together. They don't move perfectly together. So there's a lot of short-term dynamics in these markets on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. But the other thing is that when we get into these high price situations like we're in now, you notice that the calf prices go up a lot farther and faster than the feeder cattle prices. And the feeder cattle prices go up farther and faster than the fed cattle prices. And so those spreads between those lines gets farther apart. And that has a lot of implications for cattle marketing, particularly beyond the cow-calf level. I mean, the market is pretty clearly now focused on cow-calf incentives, if you will. We're at a very small inventory. The market is trying to encourage herd rebuilding, and that's the reason for these really high calf prices right now. But beyond that, everybody else in the industry above the cow-calf level is basically a margin operation. Meaning that their profitability really hinges on buying and selling more or less in the same market. So stocker guys buy these calves and sell feeder cattle after a time period of production. Feedlots buy feeder cattle and sell fed cattle. Packers buy fed cattle and sell box beef. Retailers buy cuts of beef and sell at the retail store. And all of those are margin operations. And those margin operations actually get more difficult and less friendly in this kind of a market environment. So what we see here is a market that's really oriented towards the cow-calf level with these high calf prices, but for everyone else, it's actually kind of tricky. And we'll talk about some of the implications of that as we go forward. Final one is just cull cow prices. These again are Oklahoma-based prices. They've been going up every year for the last several years, higher across the board. We're at record levels for cull cow prices. These would be slaughter cows for the most part. And so those are at record levels as well. What's behind this, of course, is that we've been liquidating. And I'll show you a graph in a minute, but just the bottom line is for 2024, coming into 2025 on January 1, the total cattle inventory was smaller. The beef cow herd was smaller. The beef replacement heifer number was smaller. And those are the key ones really in terms of where we find ourselves. The calf crop was actually about flat last year, but it's generally been declining for the last 6 years. The calf crop actually peaked most recently in 2018 and has been getting smaller, which means that we've been producing less feeder cattle for the last 6 years. And that has obviously important implications as we go forward. So the beef cow inventory is the smallest right now since 1961. And in fact, even though the 2014 low, which I'm pointing to here, produced record high prices at that point in time, we're about 1.1 million head smaller even than that level now. And in both cases, we are smaller than we intended to be. It was because of drought that we got here. We were forced to liquidate. And we're smaller than the market wants us to be. And you can see that obviously through the high prices that we're seeing. The market is trying to encourage us to increase production. And that starts with rebuilding the cow herd so that we have the ability to produce more calves and feeder cattle as we go forward. This
Derrell,
is a,
there's one question in the chat.
yeah, sure.
Um, they're asking, when will we start to see significant heifer retention, or is it happening already?
Yeah, I'll answer it now and then we'll come back to it at the end. The short answer is we are not seeing it yet. I don't have any data to confirm it. And so that's one of the reasons why this cycle is playing out more slowly. Good question. A little bit ahead of me. We'll get there and come back to it a little bit more at the end a little bit. And
Okay.
this kind of gets to that actually. This is a list of the top 10 beef cow states and also beef heifer inventories. And the only reason I mention this, of course, you can see South Dakota is part of that list. These are the 10 biggest beef cow states. But on January 1 of this year, 7 out of those 10 were either equal to or slightly higher than a year ago. So even though the total national inventory was down 0.5%, the biggest beef cow states are actually either holding steady or slightly expanding. And I think that speaks to the question that we're thinking about expanding. And in some cases, some people are doing it, but we don't see it as a national effort that we can document with data at this point in time. One of the reasons is that this actually speaks directly to the heifer retention, right? So we've been declining for several years, and particularly the last 3 years, heifer inventories have been very small and getting smaller. So we don't see the additional heifer inventory that's needed as a part of a herd expansion. Again, I'll come back at the end and really focus on sort of where we go from here and the timing of when we can do that. But you can already see that we're in a significant hole as far as cattle numbers and female numbers in particular with the ability to rebuild the herd. One of the reasons that's still out there and has been why we got to this point is simply the drought. The drought it really started in some areas in 2020, but 2021, 22, 23, 24, the drought kind of moved around during that time period. So different regions had kind of everybody had their turn in the barrel, but there's been a significant level of drought most of the time over that period, and it's affected a lot of producers. You can see from the current drought map that we don't have a lot of really exceptional the most severe type of drought, a little bit in West Texas and in the desert Southwest, but we have a lot of marginal drought conditions, places that are dry or in early stages of drought or lighter stages of drought. But that's pretty scary for this time of the year with warmer temperatures, spring coming on. Obviously, the forage growth the next 2 to 3 months is critical for how the year is going to go the rest of the year. And so drought is very much a threat that's out there, even though we don't have a lot of areas with active drought right now. The forecast is not very promising. This is the current forecast or outlook for drought from the Climate Prediction Center, and they're basically saying the brown areas are areas that are currently in drought. These kind of yellowish colored areas are adjacent areas that may develop drought. So the bulk of these, the bulk of the beef cattle in the country are right down the middle of the country, and much of that area is in drought or is likely to perhaps develop drought. So the forecast is not.
There's another question, Derrell, when you're ready.
Yep, you bet. The forecast is not very friendly at this point. Go ahead.
Thanks. So they're saying you said the inventory is down due to drought, but are there other driving factors for the dramatic decline and slow recovery?
In terms of the decline, I think you can lay almost all of it to the drought. Market conditions, if you go back to 2019 when we were at the peak numbers, we were probably going to do some cyclical liquidation, but it would have been relatively minor. At the time, I remember saying that I thought we would sort of plateau more than we would actually liquidate. Then the drought hit, and the drought really has been the driving force that has taken us down, 2.5 million head or 3 million head since that time. So I think you lay most of that to the drought. Now, the timing of going forward and when we recover does have a number of other factors that I'll talk about as we get to the end. This is USDA's estimate. Basically, about half of the cattle in the country, 45% of the cattle are in a region that's in drought now. And if those areas expand a little bit, it could get even more significant. So turning to feed markets for just a minute. We had very high corn prices that started building in 2021, 22, and into 2023 were high. And then we had a record corn crop in 2023. And so that dotted line at the top shows the decline in corn prices as we got through the year and harvested a record crop. 2024's corn crop was not a record, but it was very large, not far behind the record. And so we've been operating now for over a year, about 15 months or a little longer at these prices that are, about as low as you can expect them to get at this point in time. For the foreseeable future, I don't see corn markets jumping up. Now it's early in the year. We don't know what the 2025 crop will be, but the weather forecast that I just showed actually is relatively friendly for much of the Midwest in terms of the major corn production areas. It tends to be more, sort of scary from a drought perspective in the Great Plains and towards the western part of the country. As a result of the declining corn crop or corn price, we've seen feedlot cost of production go down or cost of gain significantly, and that's what we're seeing here. This is Kansas feedlot data. And so again, feedlots have enjoyed much friendlier cost of gain that allows them to at least bid for feeder cattle a little more aggressively. That's part of the support for feeder cattle prices. But feedlots still have a lot of challenges, even though the feed cost is less of an issue for them than it has been for the last 3 or 4 years most of the time. They have a lot of other challenges. The most notable one was the thing we talked about to begin with. The spread between the buy-sell relationship between feeder cattle and fed cattle is about as wide as it gets. And so that means that feedlots face a really lousy gross margin, if you will, for buying feeder cattle and selling fed cattle. And even though the cheaper cost of gain helps them on that, it doesn't solve their problems. And not only that, cattle numbers do continue to squeeze tighter. So feedlots are increasingly going to have difficulty maintaining their inventories. And I'm going to talk about that. They've done a pretty good job for the last 18 months or so of holding feedlot inventory steady. That's basically what this graph shows. The dotted line was last year, and compared to the green line the year before, 2023, on a month-to-month basis, feedlots held the inventory pretty steady, just about equal on a year-over-year basis, despite the fact that there's actually less cattle in the country. Now, as we come into 2025, the red line shows, in particular this last month, feedlot inventories were about 2% below 2024 levels. We will get a cattle on feed report this Thursday, and it's expected to show again that we're about 2% below a year ago. And in fact, when you look at the long-term decline in calf crops and feeder cattle production, it looks to me like over the next few months that we will see feedlot inventories decline pretty sharply. They started down in 2022. The green line here is an average feedlot inventory, taking out the seasonality here. And so they started down in 2022, late 2022, but for the last year or more, they've just moved sideways. They've held steady. But I think when you look at overall cattle numbers, before it's all over with, we're probably going to drop this feedlot inventory down by about 1 million head, perhaps a little bit more as we go forward. We are actually running less cattle through the feedlots. And so this is kind of tricky to explain. If you look at average placements, which is the blue line, it has been declining, just like the calf crop has. So that's consistent. And the marketings are also working their way lower. And so what we have here is a situation where, think of the feedlot as a water tank. And you've got a pipe coming in, that's placements. So cattle come into the feedlot. You've got a pipe going out, that's marketings. And even though there's less water coming in, this blue line is declining, there's less placements coming into the feedlots. If you slow down the rate of turnover once they're in the feedlot, then you can hold the level of the tank full. And so that's basically what feedlots have been able to do for about 18 months. I don't think they will be able to continue doing that indefinitely. And I do think we will see those inventories come down over time. One of the reasons they've been able to hold inventories, which is because we have continued to feed heifers. So now we're back to talking about the flip side of heifer retention. If we're not retaining them for breeding them, what we're doing is putting them in the feedlot and feeding them. So this is one of the pieces of data that says we're still feeding heifers. This is quarterly data, and we will get an update to this Thursday in the cattle on feed report. So if this line starts to come down more than it has the last several quarters, then maybe that's an indication that we're moving back to something like this, which is what the heifer on feed inventory did during the last herd expansion or herd rebuild. We haven't seen it yet, but so that's one of the pieces of data that I'm looking at as an indication that we would begin heifer retention. The other reason that feedlots have been able to stay full is because they have slowed down the turnover rate by extending the days on feed. So they're actually on an annual basis running less cattle through the feedlot, but they're leaving them in there longer. So again, we're keeping the tank full by slowing down the rate at which they exit the feedlot. And so days on feed extended, it's been going up generally for a long time. Some of that's just a function of the type of cattle we have, the genetics we have. But in the last year, that days on feed accelerated even more. Now it is starting to come back a little bit, and that may be an indication that feedlots have sort of maxed out on the number of days on feed. I think they probably can't continue to increase days on feed. And so again, that's another reason why the inventories will probably be more difficult to maintain going forward compared to what we've done for the last 15 to 18 months.
Another question, Derrell.
Yeah.
They're asking, how long do you think the economy can withstand these high cattle prices and lower inventories? And what do you expect it to do to packaged beef prices / demand?
Yeah. Again, we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Beef demand has been incredibly resilient up to this point. And I am going to show you, I might postpone part of that, just a couple of slides. I'm almost there. And we'll talk about beef demand briefly. One of the consequences of feeding cattle longer, the increased days on feed, is that carcass weights go up, not surprisingly, right? So the cattle stay in there longer. Last year, we added about 23 pounds to steer carcass weights in 1 year. And that's a big increase for 1 year. And so far this year, we're even higher yet. I don't think they'll keep getting higher, but they are probably going to stay high for the foreseeable future. So we have less cattle, but we are getting more pounds out of them. So in the short run, we're not seeing the decrease in beef production that the smaller cattle numbers would imply. But again, going forward, it'll catch up with us where we will see beef production come down. I'm going to skip that one and go, well, this one talks about quality grade, and this is an important part of that demand question. One of the reasons that beef demand, I believe, has been so good and so robust through, even though we do have record high prices, is simply because we are, as an industry, cattle producers continue to provide very high quality. Certainly over the last 15 years or so, quality grade has improved. Now it's kind of plateaued here right now. We're getting a little bit of increase from those extra days on feed, but not all that much. But the reason it's not continuing to go up is we're already producing about 85 to 86% of our fed cattle are already grading choice and higher, choice and prime. And that's remarkable, actually, as an industry, that the quality grade has been so good, the consistency is better of those products, and those are keys to the beef demand. Now, the other thing that happens when you feed cattle longer is they get fatter. So the yield grade 4 and 5 percentage has also gone up. Not necessarily a good thing for the industry, but it's understandable why it's happening, at least in the short run. It'll probably continue high for some period of time. At some point in time, I would expect it to back down. but that may be it may be close to 2 years away before that would happen as things stand at this point in time. So cattle slaughter was down somewhat last year, but almost all of the decrease was in cow slaughter. Beef cow slaughter was down sharply. Dairy cow slaughter was down. So that's what we would call the non-fed part of our beef supply, the lean beef, if you will, that largely goes to our ground beef market. And actually, fed cattle slaughter was almost flat last year, fractionally higher, with almost no decrease, and steers were actually up slightly and heifers only down fractionally. So far this year, pretty similar. Not much decrease yet in fed slaughter, although that could change before the end of the year, but the cow slaughter continues to be very low. And so as a result, last year, 2024 beef production was almost unchanged from the year before. It actually consisted of an increase in fed beef production and a decrease in non-fed beef production last year. Going into last year, I was predicting that beef production would fall upwards of 4%, and that didn't happen because of the dynamics in the feedlot industry. So where am I at now? We think it's going to come down this year to some extent. Right now, we've got it 1 to 2% down for 2025. Carcass weights are still offsetting decreasing animal numbers. But as we go forward, at some point in time, I do expect that we will start retaining heifers. And when we do, then that fed supply, that fed inventory is going to come down more sharply, and slaughter will come down and beef production will come down. So it may not happen this year, although I think it will begin to happen more, at least in the second half of the year, than we see right now. Going forward. Now, the other part of demand question is, of course, alternative proteins. And so if you look at pork and chicken, we have lots of alternative meat out there. Supply is not an issue. And actually, beef prices are high relative to those meats. And, you know, again, that's a good thing from a demand standpoint. It means that consumers are willing to pay for beef. There's plenty of choices. If they wanted to do something different, they could. But there's no indication at this point that they are. In fact, boxed beef prices so far this year have been well above year earlier levels. And again, this is with no real decrease in production. At some point in time, beef production is going to start to drop, and that will likely push these prices even higher at some point in time. Retail beef prices are at record levels. So this tracks it back several years. And you can see the most recent data, which I think was February, has retail prices at an all-time record high. So the demand question is certainly one that I've been watching for really three or more years, looking for indications that demand is weakening. Now, I will say, and you know, we haven't talked about it, but obviously with all of this macroeconomic stuff that's going on in the country, all the tariff and trade related things and the implications of that for the general economy, that's probably where the biggest threat lies relative to beef demand. If we see enough impacts, negative impacts on the broader economy, that could translate back into some impacts on beef demand. So certainly one of the factors that we need to keep a close eye on as we go forward. Got a couple slides on trade, and then I want to wrap up with back to the cattle cycle question and the heifer retention question. Beef exports actually peaked at an all-time record in 2022, started to decline as expected in 2023 as we moved into these higher prices and generally tightening supplies. And so we did see a drop in 2023 year over year. But in 2024, it didn't drop much farther. Okay. Now, again, with all of the political stuff that's going on, it will be impacted in 2025. There's just absolutely no doubt. So far, we've got 2 months of data in 2025, and it's lower. But going forward, it's really an unknown just exactly who all will be impacted and how much and so on. But the bottom line is it will be negatively impacted when we look at the total across all of those different markets as we go forward. On the import side, Imports started to go up a bit in 2023 and jumped more sharply in 2024. Much of these imports, we've done this for many, many years. We import additional lean beef primarily to supplement our non-fed beef production from our cull cows and bulls that all go into the ground beef market. As that non-fed beef production is falling domestically in the U.S., there's even more demand, and of course the price levels are attractive to other countries that have the ability to supply beef to the U.S. So we saw a big jump last year in beef imports from Australia. The others didn't change that much. Brazil was also higher, and those accounted for much of that increase. We will see an increase in imports again this year and probably next year going forward as we continue to tighten our cow supplies and our cull cow supply in the U.S. So beef imports start really high in the early part of the year. That's related to a tariff situation that gets filled very quickly, or a quota, I should say. And then once that's filled, they come back down somewhat, but they will stay higher as we go through the year. So we will continue to see increased imports going forward. Need to talk a little bit about live cattle trade in North America. We historically import cattle. We both import and export cattle to Canada and Mexico, but the imports are significantly larger from both countries. So from Mexico, we typically import about 1.2 million head a year, which is what we did last year. And I'll talk about the thing that changed last year that's still impacting that market. One of the differences, though, is that a much bigger percentage of these imports from Mexico last year were spayed heifers. Normally, heifers make up less than 20% of total imports. And again, they're spayed, so they're not coming in for breeding. They're coming in as feeder cattle. But normally they represent only less than 20%. They were upwards of 40% last year, 35% anyway. And that's because the drought situation in Mexico is also very severe. I was actually just down there about 3 weeks ago or so, and northern Mexico is experiencing an extreme drought situation that's causing them to liquidate. Therefore, they were sending more heifers. Now, late in the year, you probably heard this. It gets maybe more attention down here where I'm at in the southern part of the country, but Mexico discovered New World screwworm in the southern part of Mexico, way down on the border with Guatemala and Belize. And because of that discovery, they announced it. The U.S. closed the border in late November, right before Thanksgiving. So these imports of Mexican cattle dropped to zero for the rest of the year. And it stayed closed until they got new protocols in place to make sure we don't inadvertently bring that New World screwworm fly into the U.S. They have resumed, and they're slowly building back up over here to more typical levels under a much expanded set of protocols for that exportation. So that has had a big impact on them, especially, but also some impact in the U.S. market. Not really a major factor, but it does change the timing of these cattle coming into the market. On the northern border, we do import cattle from Canada as well. But it's a more diverse set of cattle. We import fed cattle from feedlots in Canada that go straight to packing plants in the U.S. We import slaughter cows and bulls, just like our cull cows and bulls that go to slaughter. And then we import feeder cattle, some feeder cattle that go into feedlots in the U.S. And so nothing's really changed on that front. We are importing a few more cattle from Canada this year, but nothing that really represents any major change in the normal sort of course of business that's been in place for a long time. Okay, last few slides. Back to kind of where we are numbers wise, and more importantly, when will we grow, and how fast can we grow, which I think is a big question. In 2022 and 2023, these two red dots on this line, for the whole year, for those 2 years, over 51% of all the cattle we slaughtered in the U.S. were female. They were cows and heifers. And that speaks to why we are in a effectively in a hole relative to the availability of female cattle to do any herd rebuilding. And so if you look at heifers, this is kind of a busy graph, but all you need to think about, if 0 year here is the low year, so maybe this year is the low for this cattle cycle. If that's true, in previous cattle cycles, we were building heifer inventories prior to the beginning of actual herd expansion. Okay, that's what these green and blue bars show you for the most part in previous cycles. The red bars are what we've done the last 3 to 4 years. We have actually been slaughtering and decreasing the availability of replacement heifers. You saw that in that earlier chart. And so that's the difference this time, is that we're in a much bigger hole, if you will, relative to the availability of females. These two lines are, one of them is bred heifers that will calve this year. It's at the lowest level of all of this data on the graph. And the other one is heifer calves that we had on January 1 that we're going to breed this year for next year. And it's also at the lowest level in that data as far back as it goes. All of that to say that depending on what cow slaughter does this year, the beef cow herd could either get a little bit smaller in 2025, it might stabilize, and it might grow just very fractionally. But if it does, it would be 0.5% or less, more than likely. So can't really see any herd growth this year. And even for next year, unless we start breeding a bunch of extra heifers that we didn't say we were planning to breed this year, then for 2026, the number of heifers calving, it could go higher, it might be lower. It depends on what we do this year. So we don't know yet, and we won't have data for a while. But the bottom line is we're unlikely to grow in 2025. We're unlikely to grow very much in 2026, even if we do start some growth. It will probably take until 2027 before we could see significant growth. And think about it, if we save a heifer calf in 2025, this year's calves, we can breed them in 2026, they will calve in 2027 and enter the herd. That would be the first year that we could see significant growth if we start retaining heifers now, heifer calves. And again, I don't have any data that says we're doing it. I think we probably are thinking about it, but it's going to depend on drought, and it's going to depend on a lot of other factors as well. So the process of rebuilding the herd is pretty straightforward. To do, the last cycle expansion was from 2014 to 2019. And in order to do that, we saw heifer retention increase to record levels. We saw cow culling decrease to record low levels. So we save as many cows as we can, we add more heifers, and that adds up to herd growth. What are we doing now? Well, the cow culling is coming down. It's not down to the level that I would think indicates herd growth yet, but it's headed in the right direction. But the heifer retention is still getting smaller. It's not turned up at all. So that tells me again that we're a little ways out from actually putting together any significant herd growth. It can't happen in 25. It's not likely to happen very much in 2026. I think it would be 2027 before we would see, at the earliest, before we would see significant herd growth. So this expansion and price cycle is, the herd expansion is starting slower. We have to rebuild those female numbers. We still have a lot of drought threats, which is understandably making folks cautious about being too aggressive. I know producers, I talk to producers at every meeting that individually are maybe doing a little bit of expansion or saving some heifers, but collectively for the groups, doesn't look like we're doing it. And there's certainly no industry level data that would suggest. When you add to that the fact that, finance costs are much higher now, and it's going to be more difficult. Lenders are being more cautious as well as producers. So nobody's getting very aggressive about trying to rebuild quickly. And we simply cannot do what we did in 2014 to 2019 to see that kind of rapid growth. It's going to be a much slower process this time. again, if you think about it, it'd be 2027 before we get a heifer to calve, I should say. Then by the time you feed out that calf and or raise it and feed it out, you're talking 2028 really before you see any increase in beef production. So we're going to be in tight supplies. They're actually going to get tighter at some point because we have to take the limited numbers we have now and squeeze them even tighter in order to save those heifers for breeding. So the tightest supplies and the biggest decrease in beef production is ahead of us. The highest prices very likely are ahead of us, even though we're at record levels now, barring some major general economic meltdown in the country or globally. Short of that, the highest prices are yet ahead of us. And I think we're going to be in relatively strong market situation through much of the rest of the decade. I think it will be late in the decade before we can change production enough to ensure that we would push ourselves back into lower prices. So cow-calf returns are at record levels. Market is telling cow-calf people to rebuild the herd, but there's reasons why it's being slow. If you normally keep your calves and add weight on them as a retained calf after weaning, there's less incentive to do that right now because those margins for stockers, which is what you're doing if you retain your calves, is not that good. This is based on current markets. About a week before last in Oklahoma, if you took a 500-pound calf today and you put 250 pounds on it in today's market, those pounds are worth $1.07. That's not very good in today's market. I'm not sure you can put weight on cattle for any less than that. There's certainly not much profit potential in there. So as a stocker producer or as a cow-calf producer who could retain their calves to bigger weights, basically the market is telling you now, just produce and sell weaning calves. Okay, that's where the focus of the market is at this point in time. So I think we've said all this. The herd rebuilding hasn't started yet. It will be a slow process. Market's focused on cow-calf returns. Supply fundamentals will remain tight and pushing prices even higher, barring some external factor. And that leads to the bottom part is that it's going to be volatile and very uncertain. There is a lot of risk in this market, even though we're at record high prices. We've seen this last week. Markets dropped pretty sharply. They're bouncing back this week as a result, again, of these external political and other factors. And so you have to be prepared for that as producers. You still need to think about risk management relative to those points in time when you need to market something, because anything can happen on any given week or a couple of weeks. But unless it's something massive, it's going to be fairly short-lived. The markets will bounce back. So you either have to be prepared and able to wait to avoid those short-term shocks, or you need to do some sort of risk management to protect against those kind of short-term shocks in the market. Dawn, I think I probably went as long as longer than I intended to. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. Thanks, Derrell. There's a couple questions in the chat. I'll read the first one here. Do you have any update on the lab-grown beef food products and if it's something beef cattle producers should be concerned about?
The short answer is I don't think you need to be concerned about it. It's technically possible. There's nothing remotely commercial out there that's going to happen. I think there would be a lot of challenges, both from a price standpoint and just a consumer acceptance standpoint. So I don't think the lab-grown meat is a threat. Certainly not in the foreseeable future. It's probably not going to go away. People will keep messing with it, but I really think it's a very limited possibility, realistically.
Thank you. The next question is, have you seen a large amount of dispersals with these high prices?
I do hear about some producers using this as a chance to get out. It happens pretty much every cattle cycle. When we get to the high prices, there are some producers who decide this is the right time to exit the industry. I don't know that I would say it's more than usual this time. But if you look at the overall age demographics, and age of producer was on one of my lists. I didn't talk about it specifically, but certainly the overall age demographics in agriculture and specifically in among cattle producers continues to advance a little bit. So the average age continues to go up. There is a significant portion of our producer population that is going to transition in the coming years. And so we will see some of that. I don't think those are major factors. If the follow-up part of that question is, does that have a big impact? I don't really think it has a huge impact necessarily on what's going to happen in the cattle industry this time, but it's one of those things that probably slows down process. Because a producer that is thinking about transitioning out, there's going to be a time lag between where those resources go and who picks them up, and even if they stay, and then in most cases they probably will stay in production ultimately, but it takes time and adds to the lengthy process of deciding what comes next for a new operator of those resources.
Okay. Thanks, Derrell. I don't have any more questions in the chat, just one comment, and it's a thank you for the information and for helping to plan for the future for their cattle herds. We have quite a few folks in the room here, so if you have any questions, now's the time to ask them. Well, you have Derrell here in front of you, but he did put his stuff here on the screen, so he's been a really good source for me and my team. We follow the newsletter and we keep up with all of the different things happening. So we'll just sit for a minute. Folks can ask questions in the chat, the Q&A chat, or just the regular chat if you'd like. But Derrell, with that, is there any closeout things that you'd like to offer?
No, just, I individually producers, probably in a lot of cases, we're still concerned about drought. We're either caught up in it still or trying to recover from it or trying to let our resources recover. And so that's been part of the slow process. And I know that's a continuing challenge for a lot of producers in your region as well as down here where I'm at. But, the other thing that I've encountered, and I expected that, is that as producers remember 10 years ago and the relatively short-lived high prices we had then, some producers have been reluctant to get very aggressive because they just didn't think the market was going to last long enough for them to take advantage of it. And what I've shared here and what I've been seeing develop over the last 2 years is that this will be a much more lengthy process. I think there is time to rebuild or expand if that's something that you're able to do, to be a little more aggressive and take advantage of these markets, really respond to what the market is telling us as cow-calf producers. There is time to do that. Now, there will be a point in time when it's too late, when that ship has sailed, but I think we're a couple of years away from that point. So there's still time to take advantage of this market.
Cool. Thank you, Derrell. We appreciate you and your time and expertise. There's one more question that just popped up in the chat, and we do have time for that. So what changes do you expect to see in import and export numbers with the tariffs?
It's really very difficult to sort out. I mean, the bottom line is there will be a negative impact because just the nature of disrupting markets. I mean, markets do some things very, very well, and this is going to be a disruption in those. As it stands today, or maybe I should say as it stands at this moment, because it changes, it seems like multiple times a day in some cases. But obviously the issue with China, broadly speaking for agriculture, is going to be a huge one. And even for the beef industry, China has become our number 3. China and Hong Kong together have become our number 3 beef export market in recent years. And so, effectively being priced out of that market, if you will have some impact. And then behind the scenes, all of these things across both importing and exporting countries are going to cause a number of changes in flows of product around the world. So we're going to see a lot of change and a lot of disruption in a lot of those markets that are either direct or indirect effects of all of this. And the short answer is we just have to wait and see kind of where it shakes out. And even if all of a sudden at some point all of this goes away, the effects will not go away immediately. Once we've made some changes, it will take some time. So we can expect to see changes in these patterns. At this point in time, it's really difficult to say much more than that, because there's just so much volatility in what we're saying, let alone what we're doing and the timing of when it's all going to take effect.
Thank you, Derrell.
Yep.
All right. I'll leave the chat open and you guys can ask them, but I will offer just a few closeout things from the Occuton side. So next month, we're having our native land insurance agency webinar with Brittany Begay and Dugan Kelly. They'll be talking about some of the products they have, which are PRF and LRP, which Derrell spoke to a little bit here, risk management things. So join us for that on May 20th from 12 to 1:30 again. And then you can go to our website and see our entire lineup of webinars that we have coming up. And this, of course, will be recorded. So you can go back and reference all of the things that Derrell spoke on our website within the next couple days. And then, as always, we have our newsletter as well. You can go to our website and sign up for that and see all of the things happening here at Occuton in real time. And I'm just going to check the Q&A one more time so I don't miss anything. There's just a lot of thank yous in the chat box, Derrell. So
you're very welcome anytime. And if there's anything I can do to help, give me a holler.
Yep. And I would encourage you all to sign up for Derrell's newsletter to keep up with all of the things that he offers.